Hello. This is the beginning of a short series about moving between a notation program and Reaper. And in this series, I'm going to cover some pretty important concepts about dealing with stringed instruments, other kinds of ways of manipulating dynamics, dealing with articulation changes, tempo changes going between these two formats, etc. So I'm going to break it up into, let's move the cat. I'm going to break it up into small parts. And for starters, I have a small, very short piece. It's not really a whole piece, called Phrygian Song, which is just a piece written in E Phrygian. And you can sort of see E is that Phrygian mode that has no sharps or flats, and for piano and cello. And this is in Note Flight, which is about the most basic notation program you could use. And let's give it a listen. All right. Not bad, Note Flight. You'll notice that there's a lot of performance information, most of which we hear Note Flight making some effort to interpret. We have dynamics in both instruments. We've got pedal markings for the piano. We've got some slurs, which I think actually does make a difference in playback for the cello. And we've also got an articulation change to pizzicato and then back to arco, which means with the bow. We have a writ here, which is very kind of dramatically played out in Note Flight. And so basically, we've got a lot of stuff. Now, what's going to happen when I move into the DAW with this project is that a lot of this performance information is going to be carried over, and what we're going to do is we're going to export a MIDI file. So I think on a previous video I talked a little bit about MIDI files, but basically a MIDI file is a pretty compact file that's going to include all of this musical information, the notes, the rhythms, the tempo, the time signature, the changes in dynamic, the changes in pedaling, the changes in articulation. A lot of that will be contained in the MIDI file. We don't always know exactly how, and part of what this series is going to look at is where these performance indicators are in each place, and how we can get to them and control them. The reason we might want to leave Note Flight, once our piece is done, or some other engraving program, would be maybe to more work in more detail about the playback, right? Say we're generating a MIDI demo, we can't really control much here. For instance, it's hard to control in Note Flight what this writ is like, or how loud these crescendos are. I can say forte, but one person's forte is not everybody's forte. So I think that I might have just gotten philosophical there without meaning to. So first I'm going to save this. And what I'm going to do next is to export a MIDI file. So whatever program you're using, whether it's MuseScore or Note Flight or Finale, Sibelius, Dorico, Notion, Flat, I'm pretty sure. Whatever you're using, you should have the ability to export a MIDI file. Now, this is different from exporting, say, an XML file. XML is, where are we? Let's look at what our options are here. Yeah, so PDF obviously is to read it. These documents, XML scores or compressed XML, are useful for moving in between different notation programs. So if you want to move from Note Flight into Dorico or into MuseScore, that's the one that you would use. It would have more graphical detail than a MIDI file. But if we're going to go into a DAW like Reaper, what we want is a MIDI file. And we don't want a wave audio or MP3 audio. I do have a video in the overall series here about distinguishing the different file types. And I encourage you to take a look at that. But for now, I want a MIDI file. So I'm going to click Continue. And that's it. Super quick. And I am going to put this somewhere where I know that I can find it. I'm going to say Phrygian Song from Note Flight. I'm going to put the date on it and everything. I'm going to be close to the date anyway. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. So that's that. Now I am going to switch over to Reaper. So here's a blank Reaper project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that folder that's got my MIDI file. Here it is. And before I drag this into the Reaper project, which is what I'm going to do, I want to check one thing. I'm going to go to Reaper Preferences, and I am going to just make sure, go into Media, MIDI. I want to make sure this, always prompt to import tempo from MIDI files with simple tempo maps, is checked. We really want the tempo map. The tempo map is MIDI information. It's going to have time signature and tempo and the RIT that I put in. So especially since we're starting right now from a blank project, we want to be asked whether we want to include the tempo map. Now, the last part of what we're going to do here is I'm going to go back to my Finder, and I'm going to grab this MIDI file, and I'm just going to drag it right into Reaper. I don't even have to create a track. And I usually start things up on beat 2. I have a little room ahead. And I'm going to get these couple of questions. Now, expand 3 MIDI tracks to new Reaper tracks might be confusing to you because we only had 2 instruments. But sometimes, depending on where you're importing from, you're going to have piano as 2 separate MIDI tracks. Sometimes it comes as 1, and it's absolutely fine either way. And yes, we do want to import MIDI tempo map to project tempo map at 2.1, right? So now we are going to get my file, and we see that what we have here is a lot of undifferentiated looking stuff. The names didn't carry over, but I can see, because I remember, the piece, and let's just look at this again. It starts with chords in both piano hands, and the cello enters on like the and of 3 in the first measure. So here I am at the and of 3, so this is probably cello. Let's just make this simple. And then I'm going to guess that this is probably piano right hand. We'll say RH. And this is piano left hand. And now we also notice that here my default was 120/4/4, but right here the BPM has switched to 90, which is consistent with what my tempo was before. And that's great. Now, unlike GarageBand or some other DAWs, obviously Reaper is not going to play anything because I haven't loaded any instruments yet. I just have nothingness. And I'm going to come back now in the next video and talk about loading up instruments to populate this piece. So stand by, stay with me.